Well, we're back again, and we'll try it. And thanks to Blake Productions for hopefully fixing our technical difficulty. So we're going to start this again. I'll say welcome to the BC Resources Coalition live panel discussion. My name is Willie Manson, and I'm the president of the British Columbia Resources Coalition. The BCRC is looking to initiate discussion on a significant opportunity to extract value-added products from our natural gas resources. We are anticipating this panel discussion tonight will serve as a basis for developing a strategy for economic diversification and growth for all of British Columbia. We have titled our panel discussion as Coastal GasLink LNG Canada, First Step or Job Done. Our discussion, without technical difficulties, will run about an hour with two panelists in our studio, which you've met, and two panelists also attending remotely. Our moderator tonight is a familiar face, once he takes his mask off, is Iain Black. He's a former Minister of Economic Development and recently completed a 7-year successful run as a CEO at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. In that role, he was a tireless advocate for the Port of Vancouver and its unbelievable and unbreakable link to BC's northern communities and natural resources, which we produce and export to the rest of the world. The BCRC has recently released a video titled Induced Jobs and Productivity. So would you please sit back, enjoy the video, and when we come back, Iain will begin the panel.
Is there a natural resources project coming to your community? You've heard it on the news. Perhaps your friends and family have even talked about it over dinner. But you are all indifferent because it doesn't affect your job, right? Not quite. That's because the concept of induced jobs is unfamiliar to most of us. We invite you to join us in understanding why you should care. There are 3 types of jobs that are created when a new project comes to your community: direct jobs, indirect jobs, and induced jobs. Direct jobs refer to employees directly hired by the new project. This includes trades, operators, engineers, managers, accountants, and human resource employees. Indirect jobs are jobs that are partially or wholly dependent on the operation of the new project. This includes energy production, raw materials, maintenance, or shipping, among others. These 2 types of jobs are obvious, but there is a 3rd type of jobs created, called induced jobs. Induced jobs are those that result from increased spending in a community due to the creation of the first 2 types of jobs. Employees in these jobs may never work on the project, but their jobs are more dependent on it than they think. This means the creation of permanent full-time positions for people in all sectors, including healthcare, construction, retail, and food service industries. No matter what industry you work in, the education that you have, or your work experience, it is likely that the development of a natural resources project in your community will result in a positive outlook to your own employment opportunities. This is why you should care.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're trying this one more time, and thanks for your patience for those who saw the beginning of this a few moments ago. We've had some internet challenges around the province, apparently, so we're starting it again. As mentioned, my name's Iain Black, and it's a delight to be here in this rather COVID-compliant environment. We are grateful for all of your patience this evening, not just as we overcame our technical challenges, but also because you're joining us under such unusual circumstances. So in that note, we're also very grateful to our friends at Blake Productions for their efforts involved in producing this evening's event and bringing this important conversation to you on your phones and desktops and laptops around the province. We have in the studio tonight 2 panelists and 2 more who are joining us through the magic of the internet. I'm going to take a moment and introduce them and then get right into our conversation. We're joined tonight by Lori Ackerman. Lori is known to many, certainly everybody in the North, as a Northern leader in both community and in civic politics, something she's been doing since 2005, and as mayor of Fort St. John since 2011. She's a huge champion of the resource sector and BC's potential, frankly, to be global leaders with respect to both the effectiveness and the efficiency with which we extract our natural resources, but equally as important to Lori is the minimal light footprint that we leave as we do so. We're also joined tonight in studio by Ken James. Ken is a proud Prince George boy. He graduated from PGSS in 1975. He has built his career in the area of chemical engineering, working on both international and Canadian value-add derivative projects. He spends a lot of time in Calgary, but he's really focused on bringing all that experience home here to Prince George and to British Columbia as we look to leverage the very unique economic and geographic advantages that are so important and are lying right in front of us in this particular conversation. We're joined online tonight by John Rustad. John built on a successful business career and then turned to politics in 2005, first elected to the BC legislature. He has had a variety of responsibilities in his time since he was first elected, including serving as the longest-serving minister of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, and he's currently running for re-election as the MLA of Nechako Lakes, and we're grateful he took a night off to be with us this evening. We also have online Geoff Morrison. Geoff is the manager for British Columbia operations for CAP, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Geoff has built a career in the government relations and policy business, fulfilling senior roles with 3 of the top GR firms in all of Canada. So he's got an enormous wealth of experience and background to share with us tonight. So let's get right at it. And I'm going to start with Ken, actually. And Ken, we've been speaking a lot this week, and we're reflecting in all of our many conversations around how the leadership provided by corporations, by politicians, and by industry, by community leaders, has just moved the dial enormously for a lot of communities in northern British Columbia with respect to the natural resource development and what it's meant to those communities. And in our conversations, however, we also focused on how there's been a series of changes that you can isolate in forestry and in oil for sure, and now we're seeing in gas with respect to who our customers are, what they're buying, when they're buying it, and what they're doing with respect to self-sufficiency. So as we contemplate this conversation about a new industry in British Columbia that's there for us for the taking if we're willing to invest in it, what are some of the lessons on which you think we can draw from that history, and how should impact or inform our thinking going forward as we contemplate the value-add gas business?
So I think we've gone through some massive changes, and I sure hope we do learn some of those lessons. So one of the first lessons and biggest lessons is that all the things that we assume, like who we're going to supply our natural gas, our oil, or derivative products that we make from that resource, we can't assume that, and I think we need to make sure we're brought it out to have more than one market. We've seen in the last decade the U.S. go from our major importer of our natural gas to the tune of 10 billion standard cubic feet a day to today they're slowly going to 0, and they're becoming the 3rd largest LNG exporter in the world. And along with all of that LNG, is they were also able to expand a lot of petrochemical feedstocks and grow that business. So not only can't we sell them at our products direct resource, it's all the derived products also have disappeared. The real advantage, and it's especially important here in British Columbia, is the proximity we have to what is the largest markets and the fastest growing markets in Asia. British Columbia has the unique advantage of suddenly it's discovered, while the U.S. has been discovering, British Columbia has now become a major source of natural gas. With first LNG project, suddenly a lot of natural gas liquids, which are the feedstocks to the value add. And I think Laurie's going to talk a little bit more about that, but it's a big opportunity.
Without question. In fact, let me then turn to Laurie. Laurie, you've experienced in your role and in your lifetime, frankly, the benefits and the challenges of being a resource-dependent community where you've got a series, I'm sure, of some visceral or initial thoughts when contemplating the development of yet a new industry with so many of the similarities of those industries that are now well developed. What are some of those initial thoughts as you contemplate a chance to yet again create an international foothold for our province in the world?
I think this is a huge opportunity for British Columbia. I think it's a huge opportunity for Canada. And I think it's a huge opportunity for the communities as well that could benefit from it. And the value that we would get from value add is so significant because we're already seeing, I heard a number the other day, between 2005 and now, so 15 years, this province has realized somewhere in the neighborhood with all of the multipliers about $20 billion from just this one industry. And so to be able to add to that just helps us get more of the necessary occupations to build a quality of life in our communities, nurses, teachers. I have always said that foundational to community is health, safety, and education. And I think that, if I was talking to my colleagues, I would say to them, what does your official community plan say? And how do you want to look? So when an opportunity comes your way, you need to know how you feel you need to be left better off with that opportunity. The province is definitely going to benefit, but the community needs to get in there in a pragmatic way and learn and understand this opportunity.
You made reference to the last 15 years. You're coming up on 10 years now as being mayor of Fort St. John, and you have been flying the flag of the North and of the resource sector for your entire career. In that time, and you made reference just a moment ago to talking we've talked to other civic leaders throughout the province, but you've also been dealing with provincial and federal leaders as well over that same time. How have those conversations changed when you look back over the 10 years and where you are today and getting ready to yet again engage on these important conversations? How are those conversations different today versus a decade ago? And what is the message you're going to bring to your colleagues in the civic governments, but also at the different levels of government, provincially and federally?
Well, so for my colleagues in the local government, our door is open. They are always welcome to come up. The City of Fort St. John purchased 75 pair of full PPE. And so come on up. We'll take you out on a tour. We will show you the functioning drilling site at the college, show you a pigging station and how it works, just to ensure that the integrity of the pipeline is maintained. It's a fabulous opportunity for people to see firsthand and in a safe environment so that conversation can change when they go home and they're speaking to the proponents. For provincially, it's really been about taking a government that we've had for the last few years that has never been really familiar with the industry and walking them through it and having them understand that we have a world-class regulator in the BC Oil and Gas Commission. And when we have an opportunity for a project that is completely encapsulated within the province of British Columbia, we can do it really well. I've had people come to me, they've sat in my office from New Zealand, from Australia, from Great Britain, from Quebec, and they say, how do they do this? And I said to them, you know what, they've taken this industry that has a significant footprint. Every resource industry does. And they've married it with a province that has very strict environmental regulations, and they've done it extremely well. For the federal government, the conversation I have with them is, let me talk to the regions that have issues with this. They need to understand that as a resource community, I'm providing them with the resources to manufacture what they're doing. Let me speak to them. We're the ones, mayor to mayor, that can connect.
When you and I were speaking about this during the week, you were telling me of some stories about some of the mayors throughout BC and frankly the rest of the country who have changed their dialogue and their approach to this conversation as a result of some of your conversations with them. How has their tone changed? What is it they realize today or what are they less afraid of today or more optimistic about today than they were before? What are some of the walls that we've banged down along the way here that we can upon which the momentum exists to move forward?
Sure. So, we've had conversations around the fact that in my entire region, we got 76,000 people. That's less than the city of Prince George. And we have a thriving natural gas industry. And so I say to them, my industry, the companies are not extracting it and processing it and compressing it and shipping it for us. We're doing it because you are using it. And so let's look at the ways you use it. Now, when you're putting your foot down saying, no, I don't want this anymore, what is it you're going to give up? And what are we going to replace it with? Right? So now let's calm down and let's look at what the regulators do and how things are managed. And it really does shift the conversation when you look at it in that way.
I'm going to turn the conversation to Geoff Morrison just for a moment. As I mentioned off the outset, we're having this conversation tonight at a very unusual point in history. Clearly, we're now at the beginning of and hopefully moving our way through phase 2 of a global pandemic. But there have been challenges in our oil and gas sector that are going back not months, but years now. So, Geoff, in contemplating sitting with us this evening, I was thinking about this, that our conversation tonight is happening in the midst of COVID, and it's an understatement to refer to as a depressed oil and gas sector, particularly in Alberta, and our family members, our friends, our fellow Canadians who are struggling there with literally 200,000-300,000 people's lives have been impacted with the unemployment happening there. Position for us, based on your role at CAP, position for us, if you would, the importance of the potential of developing this value-add gas industry that we're talking tonight, and then layer on or put into context, if you would, the anxieties that we're all feeling, not just about COVID, but frankly, the current economic and pandemic environment.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it has had a huge impact. Building on what Laurie was saying, what Ken is, this is just not an Alberta resource. This is a Canadian resource. Canada is an export economy, and our number one export by value is oil and gas. And so, what happens to Alberta matters to us, and it matters to us across the nation, but also it matters to us in British Columbia too. We produce a third of all the natural gas in Canada, and to build on what Laurie was saying too. Half of all the energy we consume in BC every single day is natural gas. And so we produce this resource for British Columbians, both as a consumer, but also as an owner. We have to remember these resources are owned by us as British Columbians, and so we get a value out of that too. So that's really good context for that. But to answer the question you're after is, we've seen oil and gas demand grow worldwide for decades, and every credible forecast out there says it will continue to grow for decades. But we've had a very difficult time in Canada, and so we've seen oil and gas investment in Canada really plummet in the last years, really starting back in 2014, where it was, and it's the largest private investor in Canada. And we need foreign capital to do that. We don't have the capital domestically to do that. $80 billion worth went down to about $40 billion. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we were probably investing $35 billion in Canada, and we shed about, as the pandemic evolved, we shed about $8 billion of that. So that's a lot of money. And so what that really means is, without that investment, we're not going to see our resource developed. We won't get those benefits. And so, again, to put that in context, a typical year in BC, oil and gas invests $5 billion in British Columbia, because we have such a vast, tremendous resource here that can be value added, as you say, to really develop a cleaner, more practical energy source in the future. And so there's great opportunity for us, but we are losing market share because we don't have market access. Ken was alluding to this before. The U.S. is now a net exporter of natural gas. My sister, who lives in Toronto, at the beginning of my career, all of her natural gas would have come from Alberta and British Columbia. Today, most of her gas comes from Pennsylvania. And in fact, the Utica produces more natural gas than all of Canada now. And so when we talk about carbon leakage, that's an example of we're importing gas from the United States that doesn't have the same values that our gas does. They don't pay a carbon tax, and yet it amplifies the need for us to be competitive while being environmentally responsible. I think we're doing that better than anyone else already on the planet, but we've got to maintain that competitiveness. We've got to be able to draw the investment from around the world to get our resource developed. We have a wonderful resource, and we can marry that natural gas with an abundance of electricity, hydroelectricity, to really make a cleaner, better fuel.
You know, I think it's fair to say that as a good Canadian boy, that I really don't want to be importing gas from Utica. The only thing I want to come out of Utica are the aspiring hockey players, because that's where the Vancouver Canucks farm team is. So we'll hopefully limit our exports to the ice and not the gas pipelines. John Rustad, I'm going to turn the conversation to you for a moment and stick with the theme that Geoff was sharing with us with respect to investment and foreign investment at that. You know, John, as a Northern MLA, as a former minister, you've been on a mission, along with Laurie, to educate and advocate for the North and natural resources in particular. I'm going to throw a question at you around attracting investment. Let me set it up this way. We have natural advantages in British Columbia, for sure. I'd like your thoughts on how you see them shifting and what you've seen over your 15 years in office, if they're shifting at all going into this next decade, point number one. But secondly, and you can take this where you will, what have you learned in your time as an MLA and as sitting at the cabinet table? What have you learned about what government's role can be or should be going forward, specifically with respect to showing the world that we're serious about attracting investment to build an industry like this?
Well, first of all, it's remarkable when you think about what we have around us, our natural resources, our people, the province. It really is phenomenal. And then you have to marry that with government policy. And so governments have to make some decisions as to what they want to see and what they don't want to see happening in a province. And so for us to be able to extract that extra value from our natural gas or any other product, we have to have the right environment, the right policies in place so that that can happen. And what I mean by that is math is impervious to BS. Politicians like to talk about a lot of things, but at the end of the day, you have to look at the baseline. What does it take for a project to be able to go forward? What are the barriers for that project to be able to go forward? And then how can government adjust the tools to lower those barriers so that we can be competitive and we can actually drive the investment? And when you get policies that tend to be driven more around ideology, you lose that perspective of how to actually make something happen on the ground. And so it's a real challenge. It gets layered on the process, the time, whether it's environmental assessment, whether it is reporting, whether it's the taxation regimes, the kind of levers that government has. It really needs to be put in a focus, and government needs to be able to come forward and say, this, we want this to happen, and so we're going to make sure we do what we can so that we can be competitive and attractive. And that's what we did to get LNG Canada up and off the ground, is we had a cross-government focus, we brought everything in place, we worked against the barriers one at a time, knocking them off, supporting the project, supporting the education, the training, the agreements, everything that needed to happen so that it could go forward. And so when we're talking about natural gas in this province, we're talking about wanting to see value added. Government needs the same type of focus in order to make sure that it can be successful in British Columbia and add that value, the direct, indirect, and those induced jobs that are so critical to all of us across the province.
To what extent, John, though, is that a repetitive action? In other words, the success of LNG Canada was, provincial, it was federal, it was local, it was Indigenous, it was, First Nations bands, it was city councils. I mean, it was such an incredible team effort over a long period of time. And the education and the advocacy and the government policy that you've just articulated so well was done to help secure that historic investment. Is that job done now in your mind, or is it that we have to redo that now for this industry? I mean, is there a finish line to this race in your view? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
The job is never done. When you look at jurisdictions around the world, everybody wants the same thing. And so we're continually having to be able to compete against whether it's the United States or whether it's other jurisdictions around what that market share can be and how to get into it. And so as government, if you lose sight even for a moment, it will slip. And then companies start saying, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to invest 10 billion or 20 billion or 40 billion dollars in these kind of large scale projects. Where's my return? What are my chances of actually getting it done in a reasonable period of time? And what are the levels of support from local governments, from First Nations, from provincial governments, from federal governments in order to get it done? And so I think governments need to continually renew their look at a project or at a particular sector, at a particular approach, so that you can always stay relevant and you can always stay online in terms of having that right environment to attract capital. And unfortunately, you know, not to be overly political, but we're in an environment today where it is extremely hard to attract capital into British Columbia and into Canada, and it makes it very difficult for projects to be able to advance.
So whenever I have the opportunity to moderate something like this, I always get a couple of key takeaways from myself and wonderful sound bites. And the first one I have today is courtesy of John Rustad, who says that math is impervious to BS. Not sure if that'll make it on a bumper sticker, but I like the expression. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the other panelists, thank you, John. We're going to come back actually and tap into more of your experience in a few minutes. One of the other panelists that we invited to be with us this evening was Ellis Ross. And he is a former chief of the Haisla Nation, and he's currently running for a re-election, as John is, in his case, as to become or to keep his seat as the MLA for Skeena. He is. Any of you who've heard Ellis speak know that he's a passionate proponent of resource development, particularly that which is transformative for Indigenous communities, and he has a lot of first-hand experience of that. He is one of the many political and community and business leaders who wanted to bring greetings this evening and lend some support to the conversation that we're having. So let's listen in to Ellis and a few of our other leaders as to what they have to say. Let's roll those tapes.
Hey everybody, sorry I can't be there. I'm a little preoccupied with a little thing called the BCS snap election, but I'm really encouraged to see all you leaders, because I know each and every one of you care about this province and care about your constituents. I know just about every one of you, so I really appreciate you guys being on this panel.
I'm Shirley Bond, and I am a strong supporter of getting to yes on major projects in British Columbia. Now more than ever, governments need to get to yes, but they also need to stick to yes. Our province has been blessed with an abundance of natural resources, and we need to make sure we're using that to our advantage. And it's not just about the economy, it's also about the environment. As we move projects forward, we need to ensure that they are done in an environmentally responsible way and in partnership with First Nations across British Columbia. These projects have the potential to create jobs, to deliver local benefits, to attract investment to our province, and to help stimulate the economy. Now, more than ever, we need to be bold, we need to take action, and we need to get to yes on major projects in British Columbia.
Hi, I'm Grant Perdue. What do BC resources mean to me? They mean everything. My family and friends are everything, and each one of them are involved with the resource sector in one way or another. Whether it be forestry, mining, oil and gas, agriculture, etc., directly or indirectly, and possibly with an induced job. I'm also proud knowing that BC and Canada as a whole has some of the most stringent environmental laws in the world. So processing more of our natural resources here can only have a positive impact on the environment worldwide, creating a healthy future for our children. That's what BC resources mean to me, and it's why you should care.
Well, I'm Bob Zimmer, Member of Parliament for Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies, to talk to you today about value-add projects using our very own natural gas. What many of you know is that we have great resources for natural gas here in Northern BC. But what you may not know is that we have projects proposed for Northern BC that actually use natural gas to build products that are needed around the world. Normally this natural gas gets shipped down a pipeline, it gets put on a boat, and these products are made in places like Asia and China. But what's proposed with West Coast Olefins is one of those projects, is that they plan to make those products right here in Northern BC, using our very own natural gas using our second to none environmental standards and using our second to none employment standards in the world. What couldn't be better than that? The world needs more Canada.
Hello, I'm Lynn Hall, Mayor of Prince George, and it's a pleasure to provide some remarks about natural resources and their importance to Prince George. Prince George is often referred to as a forestry-based community, and in fact, a recent study by Kofi showed that Prince George is number one for the number of businesses providing goods and services to the forest industry. But Prince George is so much more. It's number two in the province for companies that supply the mining industry, and Prince George is currently a hub city for equipment, materials, and services for all resource sectors. The notion of being a hub city is essential to understanding the role of Prince George in fostering sustainable natural resource industries throughout the region. And while we definitely benefit from being surrounded by trees, minerals, and sources of energy, Prince George provides two critically important services for all resource sectors. The first is transportation via road, rail, and air. The second, and most important, is know-how. Prince George is a center for education, research, and innovation, and it doesn't just happen in schools or labs. It happens in offices, in factories, and on the land base. This is how we approach and realize a balance between the economy and the environment in our resource sectors that is ultimately rooted in our community. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And
Well, I want to thank Ellis, Shirley, Grant, Bob, and your worship, Lynn. Thank you for sharing some of those remarks. I want to stay with Ellis for just a second. When Ellis realized that he couldn't join us live this evening, he and I nonetheless engaged in a series of conversations, and he made some really interesting points on a couple of different items, and I asked him a couple of key questions. We talked about value-added projects and the industry. We talked about how they seem to be involved, and his advocacy seems to involve smaller, though still very significant, investments versus the billions and billions and billions of dollars, such as, for example, LNG Canada represented, and how his advocacy for responsible resource development, especially as it economically impacts BC's Indigenous people, has evolved. And so I noticed that as a parent shift took place between from those larger projects to supporting some of those smaller ones, as I mentioned, mega projects, if you will. And I asked him why, because the tone of his voice clearly was shifting. And I said, why has your interest in advocacy changed the way it has? Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Mainly because we have no choice. I've been doing this kind of work in terms of getting major projects through the environmental assessment process, as well as getting First Nations approval for a better part of 16 years. What has changed is basically the era of linear projects, major projects, is over. And that's because of the rules that are written in by our governments, specifically the environmental assessment for BC. For example, when you put vague language into an environmental assessment in terms of what has got to be accomplished, investors and proponents are not going to come in because they're looking at a whole pile of uncertainty. When you're also looking at the language that's put into the BC Environmental Assessment Act that says outside jurisdictions who actually mount a challenge to a BC environmental assessment, you've got to put your environmental assessment on hold. Well, that's not fair. And that just adds costs and time to an environmental assessment process. It already costs maybe one proponent, maybe $20 million of some costs that they won't get back. That speaks to certainty and timelines and costs. And if you can read the BC Environmental Assessment Act yourself and take it from a proponent or developer's perspective, do I really want to come invest in BC when they have these types of rules? And that's why I think we should be focusing on non-linear projects until the BC environmental assessment process, for example, can get cleaned up in terms of wording.
Thanks, Ellis. We're gonna stay with Ellis's theme here for just a minute, John, and I'm going to throw a question back at you. You've wandered the halls of senior government. What is your response to Ellis's thoughts on the environmental assessment process?
Well, I think Ellis is absolutely bang on in what he has said. If you want to move forward with the project and you want it to be done right, You also need to make sure that it can be done in a timely way, and then predictable cost structure. The current environmental assessment basically allows a project to carry on forever, to be challenged, the cost to mount with no certainty in terms of where it goes. And I think what Ellis is talking about, and certainly what I talk about, is it's not about the environmental standards. We want to make sure that we meet the highest environmental standards anywhere, which we do in this province. It's about the overall process and what has to go in to actually get something done. So if you think about it from a perspective of, if you're going to school, you're going to take your children to school and you're going from point A to point B, and you get in a vehicle and you drive them and you drop them off and they go off to school. Well, under the environmental assessment, you need to get permits and process for each stop sign, for each corner you make, for each culvert you cross, for each intersection that you may look at, for everything. It gets to the point where if you're trying to get from point A to point B, it becomes a nightmare to do it when all you're trying to do is actually get a project off the ground. And that's what the environmental assessment, unfortunately, has become. And so I think it'll be very challenging for long projects, linear projects, but even for smaller projects, if they have to bump up into that environmental assessment, it becomes very, very difficult as a jurisdiction to be able to track the capital we need.
I'm going to stick with you for a minute, and then I'm going to go back to some other members of the group, because one of the other challenges that we have faced down as a region, as a province, as a country, in dealing with the reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples involves a lot of success. And again, our relationship with Ellis and our friendship with Ellis has taught us a lot, but it's also shown us the success that's possible. In the time that you've been in government, there has been an obvious shift with respect to the engagement of Indigenous leaders and communities with respect to resources and the development of those resources. How would you, as the former minister, the longest serving minister that we've had in this province, of that important area, how would you describe those changes, and what can we learn as we go forward from this point and contemplate developing yet another transformative industry for the people of British Columbia?
I think when you are thinking about a project of any scale, the first thing you need to do, if you're using land, if you're using resources, if you have water and other things that are required, you need to get out and you need to engage with the local First Nations. You need to build a relationship long before you consider ever even putting a shovel in the ground. You need to be able to work through these components. And then as government, in my time as minister, we signed over 435 agreements with First Nations. And these were enabling agreements. They allowed First Nations to be able to engage in the economy, to be able to address social issues, and to be able to see real benefits from projects, everything from forestry through to LNG and beyond. Those benefits have to be able to be realized by First Nation whose territory is being impacted. And so government can play a huge role as part of that, but industry needs to step up to the plate and do that early engagement to build the relationship so that you're not in a situation where First Nations are looking at suspicious as to what's going on, but they become comfortable. And as they get engaged in the project, they actually become components trying to support and move a project forward. I'll never forget the first time First Nations came to us in Victoria advocating for a mine to go forward because they had entered these agreements and they could see how transformative it would be for their nation to get their young people working and to change the dynamics for them. And that's where we need to be able to see both government supporting and industry so that we can see these types of projects advance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in violent agreement on that point for sure. For those of you just joining us, we had some technical difficulties that caused us to have to restart this evening. And for those of you who have been with us through all of that, thank you. We have about 20 minutes left. So those of you wondering how far we are from the conclusion, we're about a little over 20 minutes until we're done here this evening. So thanks for hanging in there, but we thought we should let you know as to where we're at in our program. You know, John mentioned and touched on some of the obvious successes we've had working with the Indigenous communities and the First Nations governments throughout British Columbia, and it's not been without its challenges for sure. There are other elements and other stakeholders where there have also been challenges, and I want to throw this back to Laurie here for a couple of minutes. It's not necessarily the same degree of good news and progress, notwithstanding existing challenges that still remain with our Indigenous communities, but there are stories and experiences that Laurie has around dealing with the NGOs And I wanted you to touch on that because, again, I'm trying to get a sense, a theme we're trying to develop here tonight is, as we go forward, what have we learned in the last decade, and what can we take with us as we go charging out into the next decade to build a new industry? Relationship with the Angos. Talk to me about that. How have they engaged? How has the tone changed in the time that you've been dealing with them? And the relationships with other groups, including, frankly, their relationships with our Indigenous and First Nations leaders.
Sure, and thank you. That's a very fully loaded question, but we'll
You're
get
up
through
for
this. Yeah. So I know that First Nations have been used, for lack of a better word. They've been used. They've had quotes taken out of context, and it's been really difficult on them. They're trying to build a relationship with industry. It's tough enough being the mayor of a community like Fort St. John that is growing so quickly, but I don't have health care to worry about. I don't have education to worry about and housing the way the First Nations do. So they've got all of this piled on top of them, and they're looking for opportunities for revenue. So they're trying to ensure that their revenue comes from a responsible industry. And so when they start working with some of these well-meaning ENGOs that show up, and then all of a sudden they find out that some of their quotes are being taken out of context. And it's really unfortunate that has happened. And we've had a few of our First Nations chiefs and leaders in Canada who have stood up and said, yeah, you know what, back that up, because that's not what we said. We've had, up in the Denizah territory, a lot of our First Nations communities have built companies and have significantly engaged in the industry, and that's important for them. For me, you'll recall that the West Coast Environmental Law wanted the municipalities to create a class action lawsuit against the 20 highest carbon-producing companies in the world. So, yeah, Fort St. John's going to sue Saudi Arabia. I don't think so. If you saw the list of the companies that they wanted to, these were nations that owned these companies. I mean, it was ludicrous. So we, when we got the letter, responded back to them and explained, no, that's not, what we do. They came back. We met, actually, with West Coast Environmental Law at the North Central Local Government Association meeting in Williams Lake a few years ago, year and a half maybe. And they came out of that, and the Andrew's Next blog was about, how communities actually collaborate with the industry to ensure that they are using the best and the newest technology to be efficient, effective, and leave a lighter footprint. And, there's other environmental organizations that when you explain things to them at a community level, they can't argue with it. Mm-hmm. It's a reality. And so for us to have a project that gets started and then gets tugged back because of misinformation, uncertainty is the Achilles tendon of a community. Mm-hmm. We're trying to build capacity, to grow, to be able to service the industry, and then it gets tugged back, and it's just a nightmare.
Well, I feel the need to emphasize the regrets of Ellis Ross for not being able to be here tonight, because I've heard him say similar things. I mean, he's basically, his exact phrasing is, don't put words in my mouth. I'm quite comfortable telling you what my nation is concerned about. Thank you very much. I can speak for myself. And he says, let's be clear. I have a long list of things I want to complain about or that I want addressed, but I don't need your help. Thanks very much. And I certainly don't want you to misrepresent where I stand. So I can assure you that were Ellis here this evening, I think he would have been in violent agreement yet again with that sentiment. Geoff, I'm going to bring you back in now. When Ken and I were speaking earlier in the week and we were discussing the enormous opportunity that the value-add gas industry represents, one of the specific spurs of that conversation was around hydroelectricity and how in British Columbia we have the third cheapest electricity in North America. And depending on the day, we get second, by the way, depending on what's happening. I think it's Quebec and the state of Georgia, if I remember correctly, or the other two. But in any event, at an industry level, the fact that we have this enormous resource of hydroelectricity, yes, it's of great benefit to us as citizens, no question. But it has an industry implication as well, and it is something that can be leveraged. I want to give you the floor for a couple of minutes here to share industry's perspective at that broader level with respect to BC hydroelectricity resources and or capacity, and to what degree we could be leveraging it and where it fits into this broader conversation. So nice open piece of paper for you there to work with. Talk to me about electricity and why we should care about that in this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And it is one of the things we think about a lot in the industry. It's probably the single most important thing we could do to change the emissions that the industry is responsible for in its production of resources. And so because we do have an abundance of low carbon electricity, we could use that and harness that to produce natural gas with a lower footprint on it, and then be able to export that. And so to put that into a little context too is BC has a great resource in electricity, but you can't put electricity on a boat. And unfortunately, all the places we traditionally export it to in the United States are actually in surplus right now. But we have a great opportunity to, in a sense, take that electricity, use it to value add our products, natural gas, into LNG or into petrochemicals or some other, and then export those. Those are exportable commodities. And so in a way, when we use that electricity as an input into our natural gas resource, we're exporting clean electricity in a sense. So that's the really good and exciting news. The challenge for us, though, is even though BC Hydro in BC has some of the lowest prices in North America, it is still not as competitive as using natural gas as an input because, unfortunately for us, natural gas prices have been trending down quite a lot in North America for the last decade or so. In fact, they're about 80% lower today than they were a decade ago. So even at that very low price, it's still a very difficult economic choice to choose to electrify an upstream facility, but yet we are managing to do it, and we're working on it. And the numbers don't lie, or the numbers don't. Math doesn't take BS well. We are always looking for ways to do that, and we're trying to work with government and BC Hydro to find those mechanisms to make it competitive, because we really need to make sure our end product is competitive. And so we were talking earlier about carbon leakage and export and those challenges. The people in Eastern Canada are just looking at price when they buy their natural gas. And so we really do need to be competitive. People do care about that. Customers have said they want a greener, cleaner product, but yeah, we're still competitive. And so that's our biggest challenge, is finding a way to harness that clean BC Hydro in a way that keeps us competitive, and then makes our product that much more appealing to those customers who are turning their mind to wanting to buy that product, but haven't turned their wallets yet to it. And so that is our challenge in the short run, is to really change that energy profile of the input of our product to make it a cleaner product with lower emissions, but also keep the cost down and be competitive on that world market, because it is very challenging. We do export most of our natural gas in British Columbia. In fact, we only consume 10% of it here. The rest goes to the rest of Canada and the US. We hope it will go to Asia and places like that in the future, where we can displace coal and other more intensive products. And, as a meandering here, but as a success story, natural gas is on that value chain towards cleaner emissions. The US now has the lowest CO2 emissions for its primary energy production in 20 years. And that's because they've been moving away from coal to natural gas. We've seen Alberta do that with their electricity grid too. And so it is a very strong story to say BC's natural gas is on that path to a cleaner, greener future, recognizing too that there's simply not enough renewables yet in the world to meet the growing demand for all the energy we consume as human beings. And so we have a very strong future here if we invest properly.
So that's an important element of complexity to add to the story. I mean, it's, in summary, our electricity has been a competitive advantage for sure, but the ground is shifting under our feet, and specifically, as you identified, with respect to global prices for gas. So that tells us we can't be complacent. and that price does matter of our end products, regardless of what we're selling, because capital's very fluid. It goes wherever the lowest price is. So thank you for those. I'm going to turn the conversation to human capital, because at the end of the day, to grow any industry, you need people. And when you contemplate, and this is going to direct the conversation towards Ken and Laurie for this segment, you contemplate the success and the vibrancy of the communities such as Fort St. John, such as Dawson Creek, such as Puscoopi, they flourished over the last 20 or 30 years, with a couple of very key results. You have got an incredible service industry that revolves around and is dependent upon the natural resources that are being extracted by a lot of the major players. Point number one. And all of them, most if not all, are small businesses that provide 6 out of 10 jobs in this province. And these are the men and women who've invested in their own businesses because of the other investments that are being made in our natural resources industries. And it's a very, very direct linkage. Number two is the workforce has developed in these communities. Skilled workers, unskilled workers, people who are working directly for the larger companies, and people who are perhaps working for the smaller ones I just identified. The service industry, still very, very highly skilled individuals, without question. So, Laurie, I'm going to start with you on this one. Tell me about the impact of this. Again, you've got this unique perch that you sit on, having been in civic government now for 15 years, almost 11 or almost 10 of them, pardon me, as mayor. What are your observations and reflections on watching your community evolve with respect to employment, manpower, skilled labor, and the family supporting jobs that have been impacted?
Sure. Well, first of all, happy Small Business Week to all of our small businesses out there. Thank you so much for what you do. It's greatly appreciated. They are significant. Without them, we wouldn't have so much of what we do have in Fort St. John. And these are entrepreneurs that have really put their shoulder to the wheel and made a difference. Our small businesses have grown significantly. Like the number of business licenses alone in Fort St. John has grown significantly. And so when you have people who have the faith to open up a business and employ people, you need also the educational component behind that. So the trades and those opportunities that have to be there. It's very difficult to fire up the post-secondary opportunities. And so, yes. When you've got a program like we have with Northern Opportunities where they can do that dual credit program between high school and the college, you need to keep that going. We're now moving a lot of that we're moving some of that into some of the healthcare jobs as well. So healthcare aid and that sort of thing, they're able to do the dual credit. So when we talk about building community, it's not just the businesses. It's making sure that those businesses are engaged in our college and our secondary education, and making sure that they're absolutely part of supporting the college in getting people educated through it. We have, I really enjoy some of the social functions that we used to have in Fort St. John.
And will again.
Yeah, and will again someday. This is where our small businesses would come out and contribute to organizations like our Hospital Foundation, like our Women's Resource Center, like our Child Development Center, because they understood that we need those agencies to be healthy and strong in order to create that social fabric that we need in the community. And that's really due to building that service industry that has the heart in our community.
And you started out this evening, some of your first observations, you actually didn't talk about the men and women who are working the rigs. You talked about doctors and teachers, and you talked about civil servants, and you talked about the employment and the community that is there because of and contributing to the actual industry around it. I think that's an important link. Let's pull that back to an investment level, though, Ken. So these are value-add facilities. I recall from our conversations have about a 50-year lifespan on them. So that's a sizable period of time. during which there is construction, there's operations, there's maintenance involved. And as Laurie just touched on, there's relationships with Northern Opportunities. I think of UNBC. I think of the various trades and the apprenticeships and all that investment in labor that needs to take place to make an industry like this come to life. Share with me some of your thoughts on what you think those challenges are and what needs to be done by government and by industry to bring something like this to life from a manpower perspective.
So from a manpower perspective, it's really important, even more so than the upstream where you're drilling a well and then moving on to the next well, is these facilities are going to be in place for 50 years. And their reliability and their profitability will be largely dependent on a stable workforce that is operating these facilities, maintaining these facilities, constructing these facilities. If you don't get your local community involved in the construction so they know how it's built, when you suddenly have an emergency and you need some support, do you want to be calling from all over the world, or do you want the guy down the street who can be there in 2 hours to help you out? And I think we've seen that in the forest sector. To make that work, you had to have local people. When you get into, and my experience was, Peter Lougheed started the petrochemical business in Alberta, and it took his push, not just industry by itself, to make it happen. And our most reliable workers were the ones from the local community. My project that I'm looking to in Prince George, I know if I get Prince George kids, their families are here, they're attached to this community.
Is there a role for government, though, to get those young men and women engaged, whether it's on the trade side, the professional side, the financing side? I mean, there's so many elements to this. Is there a role for government in that? And you touched on Lougheed's experience back in Alberta. Is there a role here for the British Columbia government, irrespective of who forms it, and the federal government, and irrespective of whether we have an election shortly or not? What is that role of government in this type of a discussion?
It's policy and training. If the government needs to get behind this, we would have never had that in Alberta without a Peter Lougheed. We need visionary leaders to do that. The communities need to know they've got that skill set. And there's a lot of the skill set that is the mining and forest industry, that manufacturing capability. A small bit of specialized training, and I'm sure you've gone through that a lot, Laurie, in Fort St. John. Pressure piping, pressure vessels. But they learn it. Those welders go get that tickets. But if they don't have that work, they can't keep those tickets. And so it's important that you have this continuum. The nice part about when you have the value-add facilities like they built in Red Deer and Fort Saskatchewan, even though we've had 4 or 5 cycles up and down in the oil and gas price, and the investment goes up and down with that, those plants have never, ever shut down, which means those jobs stay. All the maintenance of those and the skill set. And I think even more importantly is we start to export that talent, and that's the human resource I think you talked about earlier. That is what is truly the renewable resource in this country. But if we don't start taking pride in what we do it the best. If we don't get kids not ashamed about this industry and actually proud of it and going out and showing the world we're the best. Because we are. I have worked all over the world. They love Canadians. We are like Americans on Valium. We don't come with attitude. We come with skill, we're educated, and we're used to being the underdog. And so it really plays well. And I think it's important, those things that we really have to be proud of. And I'd really like to see Canadians stand up and be really, really proud of. We are the best. And let's do it. And it's not just the best at hockey. And I think we've lost that edge.
We may have lost that thread, but we will get that back for sure. So we are now in wrap-up mode, ladies and gentlemen. And here's what I'm going to do. I do have some closing comments before I put things back to Willie, but I'm going to turn to each of our panelists to give them 2 sentences, not 3, to give us, if you will, the key message that each of them would like to make sure that you as our audience this evening takes away from our time together. And Laurie, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. I think that my first sentence will be around you really need to strain out the misinformation and get the facts. And I think the second one is about opportunity, that it really needs to be looked at as a significant opportunity to create more revenue for our jurisdiction, to build the quality of life that we deserve.
That's a great one. I'll turn to Jeff next. Put you on the spot, my friend. Your last comment or two for the evening. What would you like to make sure our audience remembers from this evening from your perspective?
Yeah, and I'm just going to roll right on from what Laurie was saying too. This is our resource, and it provides hundreds of millions of dollars every year to the Treasury of British Columbia, to provide the resource or the services that we all rely on as British Columbians. And so it's our resource. How do we want to develop it collectively? And we are the best regulated industry in the world. We have an excellent regulator here, as Lori pointed out. We should be proud of that. We should be proud of our resource, and we should think about how we do better and continue to do better for not only our benefit, but for the planet's benefit as well.
Mr. Rustad, over to you. One or two thoughts to wrap things up.
I think from tonight, the discussion, when we saw and heard about the success in Alberta, about how they had a focus from government to make something successful, I think as people, we need to demand of our governments, provincial and federal and even local governments, the same type of focus if we want to be able to be successful in adding value to the resources we have. And I hope people really consider that.
That's a big commitment to ask of our elected officials, but I think it's an appropriate one for sure. And Ken, you're getting the last word. One or two sentences to wrap up the key thoughts that you want our audience tonight to remember.
I'm going to go back to the central theme. LNG, Canada, is it a first step or job done? And my view is, and Laurie will attest, you do not have ethane wells, you don't have propane wells, you don't have butane wells. You have natural gas wells. And if we aren't going to take those valuable natural gas liquids and process them into something that is worth way more money, and in the process making a much cleaner, pure methane fuel, then shame on us. And I know we can do better.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am now fully in wrap-up mode in a very COVID-compliant manner. Let me, first of all, as I transition things back to President Willie Manson, let me thank, on your behalf, our remarkable panelists for giving us their time, their experience, their wisdom here this evening. They include, of course, Lori Ackerman, Ken James, John Rustad, and Geoff Morrison. Let me also thank the leaders of our communities who have contributed by video in the first montage that you saw, including our friend Alice Ross, Shirley Bond, Grant Perdue, Bob Zimmer, and His Worship Lynn Hall. And to those that you're about to see, as they share some thoughts as we turn things back to Willie, some other leaders from our community, Darren Hageland, Mike Morris, Clint Chappell, and Dan Davies. Have a listen as to what they have to say, and then we'll go back to Willie. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure.
What value-add opportunity means to me is the opportunity for myself to grow professionally. It also allows for the corporate and regulatory tax structure that will fund the different opportunities available locally. It'll increase our infrastructures. It'll increase our ability for training, our vocational training, engineering, advancements in technology, and all these opportunities allow my children and your children, for my friends and my family, to have the various careers that they're looking for, and it affords us a future in British Columbia. That's what a value-add opportunity means to me.
Hi, I'm Mike Morse, and I support a diversified resource sector here in British Columbia. In addition to forest products, our province has access to some of the best copper and gold deposits in the world, including rare earth minerals so vital in today's tech sector. We have one of the richest natural gas reserves in the Peace River area, rich in liquids that are so vital in our modern world of polymers and carbon fiber, but we currently have no ability to extract the liquids here in BC and take advantage of the enormous opportunities. Let's support the BC Resource Coalition in building a strong, diversified resource economy right here in British Columbia.
BC Resources mean to me, it means there's food on my family's table. It means my kids have a future here in British Columbia for generations to come. That's what BC Resources means to me. It means that I am a BC resource and my family is a BC resource.
Hi, Dan Davies here, Peace River North, just out of Gaswell, lease site out here, just out of Fort St. John, talking about natural gas. We've been hearing lots about LNG lately, liquefied natural gas, getting natural gas from up here in the Peace Country out to the coast, liquefying it, and then sending it out to world markets so they can get off of coal burning infrastructure and onto a much cleaner source, our natural gas. The other piece of this is value added. Roughly 20% of natural gas goes to value added products already. We need to be looking at how can we do more of that. Plastics, of course, with all the discussion in Prince George that a lot of you are talking about right now on this call. The solar panel that they make, clothing. There is just endless opportunities that we can do to do some value added manufacturing with our resources that we already have here, looking at natural gas. So I look forward to seeing this, what I believe is still in its infancy, kind of an industry, and seeing it take hold in the world. And we hope that happens soon. Thank you.
Well, that's the end of our show for tonight. I would like to thank everyone for bearing with us through our technical difficulties. I would like to thank Iain and our 4 panelists and also our video contributors. I hope this discussion has given you enough information to initiate discussion amongst your friends, family, and coworkers. Thank you for watching our show. Please visit our website, the BCRC, for information on how to become a member. We're also on Instagram at the BCRC, and of course, we're on Facebook, which you're probably watching us tonight, at the BCRC. Thank you very much. Stay safe, and we'll see you again.